Hi, I'm Michael Popa, Executive Director of the Mainstream Coalition, a nonpartisan, nonprofit Kansas political advocacy organization. Welcome to the next chapter in our Continuing the Conversation series. Now through the November general election, we'll be tackling issues that are important to all of us, but that disproportionately impact communities that have been routinely undermined in the political process. Throughout these sessions, we're dedicated to uplifting Black voices, intentional diversity in our conversations, and working together to make a lasting positive impact. Today, I'm joined by a panel of individuals with different backgrounds and perspectives to discuss voting, specifically voting rights and our history of systematic voter suppression. Our first guest today is Lynnea Mckenzie with advocacy and awareness group Johnson County. Lynnea is a lifelong resident of Overland Park, and in response to continued tragedies that members of the Black community are suffering, Lynnea became one of the lead organizers for the Overland Park Advocacy and Awareness Peace March and Rally in June. Out of that event, the Advocacy and Awareness Group of Johnson County was formed, on which Lynnea serves as the president and co-founder. Her hope is that our community's children and her daughter, Genesis, get to grow up in a world that is changed for the better. Hi, Lynnea.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Of course, thank you for being here. Our next guest today is Nigel Morton with URGE, Unite for Reproductive and Gender Equality. Nigel is the Kansas State organizer for URGE and a graduate of Wichita State University, having studied political science, psychology, and women's studies. While at Wichita State, Nigel was involved in numerous organizations, including Feminists on Campus, Uniting Students, through which she received the Next Generation Award from the Kansas Pro-Choice Coalition, Voices for Choice. Nigel also worked with university administration to implement a name change policy for student records to benefit trans students who haven't had a legal name change. Hi, Nigel.
Hi, happy to be here.
Excellent, great to have you. And then last but not least, we have Melissa Styler with the ACLU of Kansas. Melissa is a Kansas City, Missouri native. She studied economics with a focus on labor studies at University of Missouri, Kansas City. Melissa joined the ACLU of Kansas as the Citizen Participation Field Organizer in December of 2017. Previously, she worked as an organizer for Planned Parenthood, with Cross-Border Network for Justice and Solidarity, and as a community organizer with the AFL-CIO. Of note, Melissa created the first ever LGBTQIA-focused human rights delegation to Honduras. Welcome to Continuing the Conversation. How are you, Melissa?
Hi there, happy to be here.
Thanks, great to have everyone today. A little bit gloomy outside, but I think we're all getting through this. Today happens to be the 55th anniversary of Johnson signing in the Voting Rights Act. So this is an apropos discussion to have today. Since then, since that time, there has been so many roadblocks for voting rights. So I think let's jump in today with a little bit of a discussion around DPOC, or the documentary proof of citizenship. Melissa, could you start us off on that? Maybe give us a little bit of background.
Yeah, absolutely. So, DPOC has been an issue for a while. Over a decade ago, the Secure and Free Elections Act, which was brought forth by Secretary of State Chris Kobach, it was an omnibus bill to change how elections ran in Kansas. It had a ton of stuff in it, but most notably it had our voter photo ID requirements and what they call documentary proof of citizenship, or DPOC. So what DPOC did is it required you to prove your citizenship before you could even register to vote. So I mean, let me be even a little bit more clear. DPOC required you to submit your personal and private paperwork, such as a certified birth certificate or passport, to the elections office before you could register to vote, not even to cast a ballot, but to register to vote. So this means that whenever you've done your voter registration efforts, if anybody, I mean, I'm sure a number of folks in Mainstream and our other organizations on here have done things like registering voters on their college campuses. If anybody did voter registration efforts, it made them essentially have to become a caseworker, following up with the voter to try and submit paperwork securely. It would take weeks to register in Kansas when across the country, it was just filling out a piece of paper. the impact of this was gigantic. Over 35,000 Kansas citizens lost their right to vote. And since if you had been registered before this bill was passed, you were grandfathered in, it disproportionately affected communities. So we saw low-income communities, especially folks of color, LGBTQIA, especially trans individuals affected at a significantly higher rate. But almost half of those 35,000 voters were under the age of 30, which is why if you're looking at voting power and who has access to it in Kansas, historically that you've seen young people are just drop off tremendously because of laws like this. Kind of what's happened with that, the ACLU sued representing the League of Women Voters and a number of people who were disenfranchised by this law. And we've taken this to court a number of times and we've won every single time. We were really hoping that now that Chris Kobach isn't Secretary of State, that the state of Kansas would leave this type of voter suppression back in the last decade. Alas, that is not true. Very recently, we've learned that the state of Kansas is trying to appeal this ruling to the Supreme Court, because as it stands right now, DPOC is not in effect. You do not have to show any kind of passport or certified birth certificate to register, but Secretary of State and the Attorney General's office are hoping to change that.
Thank you, Melissa. And it goes against the Voting Rights Act, right? I mean,
yeah.
so that's probably the main issue as to why ACLU brought it to court in the first place.
So we went on a couple of different levels. I mean, it's definitely an NVRA violation. It was also found to be a constitutional violation. You know, we'll see how this kind of washes up. I'm not a lawyer, and so I can tell you of all of my time at the ACLU observing these court cases and trying to guess what the judicial system will do, you never know, right?
Right.
But we believe fundamentally that this voter suppression law has got to go. It has been proven to be unconstitutional time and time and time again. It would be great if our legislature would just get it together and take this unconstitutional legislation off our books. It's made Kansas a national embarrassment and it's got to go.
Definitely. And Nigel, we were talking just a bit before we went live here, and you said you've had some personal experience with the effects of DPOC.
Yeah, so I first attempted to register to vote in my high school government class, and we were never told any of those things about like needing to prove any kind of citizenship. And I was 17, turning 18, starting college. Like I didn't know where my birth certificate was, and my parents got married after I was born, so I also didn't know where my name change order was, and that was like Nevada and California, just a lot of offices to try to like track down while you're also like starting college and like trying to figure out what you want to do with the rest of your life. So it ended up turning out that I did not vote in the 2014 election because I could not prove my citizenship, which was really tricky for somebody who's like naturally politically minded to like try to navigate like, okay, I didn't vote, but I'm still working on like political elections. I'm still registering to vote. So there was a lot of cultural attitudes that I had to work against when people would say things like, well, if you didn't vote in this election, then you really can't complain about having Brown back in office. And it's like, well, there's some nuance to that because there are a lot of people who really honestly did try to vote and still did work outside of that to get other people to vote.
Definitely. Well, I'm sorry that you had that roadblock, but thanks for sharing it today.
Yeah, thanks.
Of course. And so as Melissa mentioned, you know, this disproportionately affects, you mentioned communities of color, LGBTQ. Lynnea, have you heard of any experience with anyone's experience with DPOC, or have you had one of your own?
I haven't specifically, but I will say that from observing the polls this Tuesday, I noticed that it is very easy to allow things like that to happen, specifically when it comes to, and I just throw this out here, provisional voting. A lot of the times I observed from voters coming through the polls that those rules were not exactly accurate for everyone. And so with that in mind, you think about, you know, who is actually going to be a provisional voter when they come up to cast their vote. And more importantly, I'm wondering, is their vote actually going to matter? They showed up here today. They took the time to come and vote. What are kind of the optics behind if their vote is going to count or not. So I will say, for me personally, I've never experienced that, but I would love for us to know more about it and for that to be a more transparent discussion directly within the Johnson County Election Office.
Well, and you brought up a really good point, and we'll touch on it briefly here, but I'd like to maybe continue that conversation later on today, later in this conversation. But everyone has a right to vote at the poll, at their polling location, at the polling location they go to. Even if you requested a mail ballot, you can still vote, and that's what you're talking about with provisional voting. Basically, it's counted after the rest of the votes come in, after the rest of the ballots come in, and they make sure that you did not vote twice or vote at the wrong polling location, or vote advanced and then also vote again on election day. But
Right.
Everyone has that right to vote provisionally. I've heard of people being turned away from the polls, saying they couldn't vote provisionally. So that's one thing we definitely do need to work on and be on the lookout for. How, Melissa, anyone, how would DPOC, or how has DPOC affected women? Do we have any cases out there? I'm assuming, like, one of the things that popped into my head was, what about married women who have so they have a different last name than what's on their birth certificate? Is there any?
Yeah, so while I don't have any hard numbers on that in front of me right now, your instincts are right. So anytime that, you have to think about the communities who are most likely to have issue with accessing this kind of private, personal documentation. I can use my own example, and luckily this got resolved before I was even able to vote. But I didn't have a certified birth certificate, and my social security card had my name misspelled on it. I had to jump back and forth from all of these different government offices to try and get my driver's license whenever I was 16 years old. And it took weeks of time off school. Both of my parents were working and couldn't afford to take the time off work. So luckily I had a family member who had a car who could drive me around to all of these different government offices to try and figure this out. Now imagine if you are, like a low income woman who doesn't have the resources to be able to do that. And we know that women, people of color, LGBTQ folks, especially trans women of color, are have significantly less resources. They're paid less. They don't have access to the same kind of materials as white cis men do. And so issues of identification and of government documents and of taking time off work is going to disproportionately affect them, by and large. One of the campaigns that we've been running, which I would happily refer folks to really look at the disproportionate effect of people of color, of women, of immigrants, of LGBTQIA folks in having access to identification, is our Safe and Welcoming campaign to get a municipal ID in Wyandotte. We have a ton of statistics about how this affects people across Kansas there if folks are interested. I will add one last thing in. The ACLU partners with a bunch of national groups for an election protection hotline, 866 Our Vote. If anybody had any issues voting with provisional ballots, Lynnea, you're right, that's a huge issue, and our legal team is here to help you. Please call in 866 Our Vote anywhere in the nation, and we have a lawyer who's on call, ready to go, ready to help you today.
Great, and we'll put that in the chat today for everybody watching. Do you have a, what's the website for Safe and Welcoming Wyandotte? Is it, I think it's Safe and Welcoming Wyandotte, isn't it? We're all in front of computers, so we can look that up. Yeah. And we'll continue discussing until you find that. It is very difficult, even for, Nigel, you said that you were 17 and you didn't have your certified birth certificate. I'm not 17 and I have no idea where my birth certificate is. I would have to get I would have to go get a new one if that were required. So,
and if you weren't a resident of Kansas and you needed to get that kind of documentation, there's usually some kind of like processing fee that goes along with it. So like in practice, it turns out to be a poll tax as well, because in my experience, I had to pay $25 just to get my birth certificate from Nevada. And then I also had to pay some fees for getting my name change order from California. Just like jumping through all of those hoops is a barrier in itself. And then a lot of those hoops come with fees.
Right. And it's specifically crafted that way to keep minority communities out of the polling locations, which is very sad, and that's something we're working on. So Melissa, ACLU and Mainstream Coalition are part of a larger coalition, and we've been working on some voting rights this year, years past. Let's talk about that a little bit. What did we see this year? What wins did we have this year?
In the legislative session?
Yes.
Ooh, so
wins-ish, right?
Yeah. So this legislative session was pretty bananas, just to say the least. And so, I mean, the kind of voting rights wins that we saw was really more gaining momentum. So for the first time ever, we saw a bill to expand which provisional ballots are counted versus which are thrown out. We've never seen a bill like this before. And really, it's something I'm incredibly excited about, because as Lynnea rightly pointed out, the issue of provisional ballots is huge. And how Kansas electoral law is written right now, you've got voters who are just falling through the cracks, and it's unnecessary. So if you move within your county and you forget to register or update your registration, or you forget to update your registration, you have to register in general, but if you forget to update your registration, or you fill out your registration form wrong and you think you did it, but it didn't actually go through for one reason or another. If you're within a certain sphere of your county, then your vote will count. But if you move across county lines and you vote provisionally, your vote is thrown out. Seemingly, I mean, this is arbitrary, right? These are Kansans moving within Kansas and their votes are thrown out. But this is also impacting folks disproportionately who are younger, who are low income, who are moving around a lot, right? These are not established communities. Whenever you're moving a lot, you have to re-register every single time. And whenever you have this patchwork of laws across Kansas, where voting requirements and voting days and times for early voting are different all across the state, and if you do vote by mail, do you need 1 stamp or 2 stamps for your mail-in ballot? Whenever it's just different everywhere, it's nearly impossible for an average citizen to be able to access their democracy. And so having that bill brought forth to be able to close some of those gaps and to make sure that the power that we get by voting, that we actually get by participating in our democracy, more people can access that and less people are falling through the cracks. Other pretty interesting things we saw some interesting stuff. Nothing particularly bad happened, which is a victory here in Kansas. Something that we also saw that we were really hopeful would pass, and we hope that it will pass next legislative session as well, is a permanent advanced ballot bill. As it stands right now, if you are if you don't have any kind of accessibility issues, any physical accessibility issues to voting in person, or you're under the age of 65, if you want to vote by mail, every single election you have to request your advanced mail ballot every single time. What we would like to do, and actually in both this expanding provisional ballot legislation and in a permanent advanced ballot bill, the County Clerks Association actually supported both of these pieces of legislation too. And they brought forth having a permanent advanced ballot system. So that way, if you register once, you just automatically, no matter how big or small your election is, you automatically get that ballot mailed to you. And that's just good sense. Right.
And Johnson County, Wyandotte County, a couple other counties this year, well, I know Johnson for the first time anyway, mailed out advanced voting applications. They mailed those out to every single registered voter in the county, which is a step in the right direction toward the permanent advance, I believe anyway. And it seems like they did pretty well in at least Johnson County, getting those votes counted.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Johnson County did do a really good job of that. I do wish that they would have provided prepaid postage for their advanced ballots like Douglas County and Shawnee County do. But still providing that that physical piece of paper to apply for your mail-in ballot application is good. You see in Wyandotte, they only sent a postcard saying you have to go to this website and print out an application to be able to do this. But let's also look at Wyandotte. It's a more low-income community. The libraries were closed. Where are you going to go onto a computer and print something if you don't have access to that at your home? And so again, making sure that every single Kansas citizen has equal opportunity to access our elections is something that we're pushing to make even improvements on between the primary and the general.
Right, and a good resource, a great resource, at least for those with internet access or internet connections, is ksvotes.org. So you can go on, you can register at ksvotes.org. You can also request both of your ballots. So if we did it before the primary, I went on, I requested my primary ballot and my general mail ballot. Then I went on to the SOS website and I checked to make sure that the request was in and that my ballot was mailed. So it's still, I wouldn't say onerous for people, but you still have to check and you still have to make sure that the process is there. But ksvotes.org is amazing for people that have internet action. You can, or internet access, you can take action at home. How did everything go in Douglas? Douglas and surrounding, I guess I would say. Nigel, you're out there, aren't you?
I'm
or are you in Sedgwick?
County. Yeah.
You're in Sedgwick. How did everything go out there?
As far as I know, there was like everywhere in Kansas a record number of mail-in ballots, but I didn't really get too close to any of the election stuff. A lot of my energy, I work with college students, so I'm trying to figure out how to do voter registration on college campuses in the middle of a global pandemic. So
Right.
Some intense problem solving going on right now.
And Lynnea, you were on site. You were at a polling location, and I failed to say this earlier. Thank you so much for working the polls.
Yeah,
We
I think.
appreciate you.
Oh yeah, it was actually a really great opportunity for me to see how it works on the inside. One of the things that made me want to register to be an election worker is the representation piece. I do, as an advocate for the Black community and as a member of the Black community, I want to see more of us come out to participate in the election and also vote. And one of the things that we don't have right now, maybe Melissa, you can share more information about this, but we don't have a lot of information when it comes to demographics on who's voting. And I think that that kind of goes into voter suppression, right? Like, we don't make that information completely visible, so that way we can't really have any say about who is actually going to the polls. One story I will share that really had me uneasy about my experience was, again, as we're talking about provisional voting, there was one African-American female that came up to vote, and specifically she had an address different than the one that was listed on the poll pad, for example. And so in that case, one, the rules on that, whether she's a provisional voter or whether she can vote at the address that she stated that is also matching the polling pad, is a gray area, right? Because technically she could have said, you know, I'm registered at this address, that's my address, you know, and I'd like to vote. Instead, because she hesitated on the address that she provided, they said that that should be considered a provisional vote because it wasn't the same address initially that she stated, if that makes sense. So the only reason why I had a major concern about that is, one, it's a huge gray area. The people that are even working the polls don't really understand after one training, and even the supervising judge and the assistant supervising judge couldn't make it straight. They did not understand if this person should actually be able to vote regularly like everybody else, or if they would be considered a provisional voter. We need to know that. And I think the other thing that made me uneasy about my experience is that, so I was the only Black person working the polls at my location of about 5 people. And that was a concern to me, that someone, a part of my community, came in and voted and was active and registered and happened to maybe be living at a different address than the one that she was registered in, right? But still active, still good, still registered to vote. The other concern I had is that because those were people that don't know my experience as a member of the Black community, their response to that situation is oh well, we'll get it right the next time. And it's like, no, It's not a well. This is a serious opportunity that we have to speak up and let our voices be heard. And as we're fighting so hard to prove to the community and to the world, which we shouldn't have to prove, but Black Lives Matter, right? Our vote matters just as much. And so the fact that the response from, other members of different communities was kind of, oh, well, was really discouraging. And I'm really also just uneasy about the fact that that's a gray area that, people that maybe don't have the qualifications to decide made decisions on Tuesday.
Sure. And, I have a question about how we can ensure that there's more diversity in the Black and Brown communities, how they're more accurately represented at the polls. But I do want to take one quick question from the chat, and that is an absentee ballot the same as a mail-in ballot? Yes. So I shouldn't, but I know I use those words or those phrases interchangeably. But yes, if we talk absentee ballot, we're also talking vote by mail or mail-in ballot. So Lynnea, how do we ensure that diversity in our community is accurately represented in polls?
Mm-hmm. So I love the fact that Nigel brought up, registering to vote as a teenager. I think it's really important to stress the importance of this beginning with 16-year-olds, with 15-year-olds. They need to be trained early on that this is your duty to the country to vote and let your voice be heard at the polls. So our organization specifically, we're working on initiatives to make that something that we can support. And we want to see younger people showing up to the polls at 18. And not just that, but we also want them to know what they're voting for. So as you can imagine, I did run into a lot of people who were voting for the first time, which is great. But if I think back to myself voting in my first election, which was the first election that Obama was a part of, that was really kind of the only name I knew, right? I saw someone that looked like me and I wanted to vote for that person. So educating the younger generation on what the issues are and who's running and what they believe in is important as well. And that's going to be beyond the history books, right? That's going to be beyond what they're learning as a part of the curriculum. And so I do want to see that change as well. I want to see changes in the curriculum. I want to see more efforts put into registering younger people to vote. And then that way they carry that practice throughout the rest of their lives. And then you, again, pass it down to your children, how important it is to vote. And so that's one way I'm thinking, but it is a community effort. I think we all have to work together to make it happen. Another thing that I want to see is more effort from Overland Park, from Johnson County and the surrounding counties and metro area to encourage people to vote, period. I'm really discouraged by the number of voters in the county when it comes to the population, right? So there are about 600,000 people in Johnson County, only 400,000 of those are voting. What are the 200,000 people having to say? Do they have opinions about what goes on in this county? And I know that that's a national problem, but we definitely cannot cease our efforts in getting more people to register to vote. And so those are just some of the ideas I have when it comes to that.
Well, I think the more action we see at the micro level here, city by city, municipality by municipality, will make all the difference in the world. And I love what you said. I saw somebody that looked like me, and so I voted. Right. So I think, representation, not even just in at the polls, but in the political process and civic engagement is a big issue that we really need to work on. And when I say we, I'm talking about white allies. Right?
Yeah.
But we need to work on that. We need to make sure that we're making room at the table for other people who are not white men to sit and to have a say. White cisgendered men, our time is kind of hopefully not over, but hopefully we're going to be making, they're going to be making some room. How does that work? How do we get more diversity in candidates?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the thoughts I have about that is first off, there needs to be, and I've been saying this a lot to some of the city officials and people that I've been in discussion with as we are organizing events as the advocacy and awareness group of Johnson County, we do kind of need to see that invitation extended a little bit further. Right now, none of the people that hold office, at least at the city council level, at the city government level in Overland Park, there's hardly any diversity. And with that in mind, we're thinking, okay, so I'm Black. Does anyone know my experience? Are they going to understand if I come to them with a problem? If I actually pick up my phone and make the effort to call them, are they going to hear me? Are they going to understand me? Are they going to be moved to the point to actually do something? And you know what? I've learned with some of the council members I've been interacting with lately that, you know what? They will. If you take the opportunity to also engage, there might be an opportunity for you to build a bridge and start being the voice of the Black community, which is something I've had the opportunity to do in the last few weeks. And so, but with that in mind, our default understanding is that we're not understood, period. And so we do need the city and the city officials to kind of invite us to the table. It's okay to say we're looking for people of color to fill these positions as well. It's okay to say, call out demographics. We want to accurately reflect the community. And so that can't be possible if everybody is white. That's not a realistic look at it, at our community. And so we do kind of need to be invited into the table, maybe kind of more so at a 70-30 ratio where there's more outreach happening than saying, you come to us. And so that's kind of what I think needs to happen on all levels.
Right. In the last election, we saw an influx of women candidates.
Mm-hmm.
What other, and this goes out to everyone, what other diversity do we need at the table?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yes, we need Black and brown diversity. We're seeing women get into the political arena, at least as candidates. Who else do we need at the table?
Well, I mean, democracy in general is about power, right? And so, I mean, it should be reflective of the community that we live in. What I really think about, I never thought that I would dedicate my life to voting rights. It's not like I was a little, third grade Melissa, like, I'm going to get people to vote, right? Because you don't think about that. I have my own lived experiences, and I know why I eventually became dedicated to this work is because I am somebody who, as I'm sure many of your supporters are as well, who's appalled by injustice, and I can't let it stand. And the more that I was fighting for, whether that be issues of mass incarceration or abortion access or any other issue that I near and dear care about within my own personal life, I was seeing that voter suppression was making power dynamics so that way any issue that I cared about, the path to victory on any of those issues was getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And let's not get it twisted. Voter suppression is designed by white people for white people, specifically wealthy white cis men. It's created this way. And so, I mean, in my place in life, I view the most important thing that I can do to dismantling my legacy, my people's legacy of white supremacy and is addressing voter suppression, because that's how you share power. And as far as the candidate work goes, what I'm seeing all across Kansas, where they can't even find people to run for office, even in incredibly diverse communities, because of issues of voter suppression. And so it's like, the hill I'm going to die on and trying to eliminate is an at-large voting system. I just hate this. Where, look at, Dodge City, for example. This is an 80% Latinx community. They don't have almost any Latinx local representation whatsoever. And you see that whenever the Hispanic and Latinx community, they don't vote at nearly the rate as the white community does, even though the white community is so much smaller in that community. And it's because, you know, if you're a young person and you look on your ballot and it's a bunch of stuffy old white men who are basically the oligarchs of your town, and you're like, who am I going to vote for? None of these people represent me. None of these people are cool. But then if you're trying to run for office, you have these at-large districts. So you can't just canvass your neighborhood. You have to canvass the entire community. And so that means that you have to pay for all of the materials to reach the entire community. That means that if you're working a 12-hour shift at the meatpacking plant, you have to somehow figure out how to reach out to, you know, the north part of town, which is 100% white, at the same rate that you would reach out to the rest of town, which is 80% Hispanic. And so to be able to run and win as a person of color or an LGBTQ person, or, you know, or any other given, you know, historically disenfranchised community member, to be able to win in those communities is so difficult, because there's no voting population for you, because whenever people go to vote, they have nobody cool to vote for, right? And so it's this cycle of cultural voter suppression on top of all of the laws that make it so much harder for historically disenfranchised communities to access that power through democracy in the first place.
Nigel, did you have anything to add? I thought you unmuted yourself for a second, so I just wanted to make sure.
I had something to add, but I still got caught up in Melissa's point, because I mean, that's true. So I work with young people. Our demographic that we work with is 18 to 20, 25 or 29, depending on what project we're working on. And when I move in coalitional spaces, I really have to advocate for the people that I represent, because they're young people who really truly care, but don't know, like, for example, with the mail-in ballots, a lot of young people didn't grow up with mail. We are living in a very digital age where people had email and social media. They didn't send letters with their friends. So the idea of just mailing a letter can be anxiety inducing, because they don't even know where to start, let alone like where to buy a stamp. And then I have had folks say, well, stamps are only 50 cents. It's like, okay, well, if you don't know how to mail a letter, how do you know you're going to buy an individual stamp? Like when I buy stamps, I always buy a book. I never ask for an individual stamp. So it's just little educational things to help.
Where do you buy individual stamps?
Post office, apparently. That's what the person told me. But
really, okay.
Post offices, like in Wichita, I can only tell you where one post office is, and it's the one I go to.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
I didn't even know you could do that at the post office. I thought you had to buy the whole roll or the whole pad.
Yeah, and so buying those stamps, it seems like, oh, $9, that's not too much. But if you're making $7.25 an hour and you're paying rent and you're going into student loan debt and having to pay for parking on campuses, which is a whole nother topic, yeah, you're not going to be able to buy a book of stamps and send off that ballot that you're not even excited to vote on, because there isn't anybody on there who really cares about your issues. Or I know when I looked at my first ballot, I didn't know how many judges you could elect, and they were all Republicans. It was like, okay, well, there's all these people I can vote for, but do I really have a choice? There's nobody running against them.
Right. And so I'm a little shameless plug here, because we're all talking about voter education, and our Voter Network Foundation, which is a 501c3 arm of Mainstream Coalition, has an amazing candidate lookup tool, ballot lookup tool. You go to ksballot.org and you can research your candidates. You can also make a plan to vote, and you can get reminders. You can find your polling location, and we have a handy dandy link out to ksvote.org. It's ksvote.org, so you can also get your advance ballot, and if you haven't yet registered to vote. So please do check that out. And I just wanted to mention that because we're talking about voter education. But there are, several tools. Legal Women Voter, they have a really nice Vote 411 tool out there as well, that you can look up candidates and kind of get some information on them.
Michael, I wanted to say something about that since you mentioned the voter network. I definitely went ahead and went through that platform in order to inform myself about how I was going to vote, which was vital for me because like I was mentioning before, I start from a default position of nobody looks like me. what are they going to do to fight for my rights? And so I'm kind of like, okay, well, it's up in the air. I could vote for a Republican, I could vote for a Democrat. It doesn't really matter, you know, because nobody looks like me anyway, so they're not going to understand where I'm coming from. So through that network, I was able to, first of all, you know, go through everybody, see who's on the ballot. From there, I could go and look at their issues and see, you know, this is what they said about jail reform. This is what they said about, you know, legalizing marijuana. This is what they said about a number of issues. And if I saw someone that like maybe I wanted to vote for, but they were missing a comment on the Black community and Black Lives Matter, I was empowered to go and ask them. So I, through that network, had the opportunity to question a couple of people and say, I appreciate, you know, the issues that you've listed. I agree with this and this and this, but what is your actual direct response to the issues that are facing the Black community in our country, specifically Black men being killed by the police? What are your thoughts about that? What do you intend to do? And I was able to get feedback from the candidates that may not have made that completely transparent on their platforms. And I just really appreciated having that resource to be able to do something like that. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you very much. And Lindsay Begum, our voter engagement director, heads that up. And so I'll pass that on to her if she's not watching today.
That's great.
Thank you. And you brought up a good point. There's been a lot of good points, but access to candidates, right? People don't necessarily think or know that they can call a candidate if their number is out there, or they can email a candidate if their email's out there. But the big part of that is if. So if you go to the Secretary of State's website, they don't have to list, I think they have to list a phone number, but you don't have to list an email. You don't have to list a website. So for some candidates, it can be very hard to find out any type of information.
Oh, yeah.
Whatsoever.
Yeah.
Now,
I mean, if you don't go through the work to put all your information out there, then have you earned the vote, honestly?
Good point. There are a couple questions that have come in. First, back to you, Lynnea. What made you want to work the election?
Yeah, so I think it definitely does tie into a lot of the things that we've all talked about today, which is first rooted in representation. I wanted to see people like me at the polls, and I wanted to see people like me work in the polls. And that was my initial desire to want to work the polls. I also wanted to figure out how. Because, you know, there's a little bit of research involved. There is a nice, pretty button on the JoCo election website now that says, you know, work the polls, be an election worker. But first you have to find that website. So you have to go through the effort to kind of like, you know, dig a little bit to find out what do I need to do if I want to work the polls. And then from there, I think that also connects with the representation piece when it comes to city officials as well. Like, what do you have to do to be a city official? Do I need any requirement? Do I need to graduate a 4-year institution to be a city council member? Do I need to, you know, have lived in a certain city for X number of years in order to be a city council member? So it's like that type of thing. I wanted to just show my community that we can be involved in these ways, and that was kind of my thought behind it, is like, if I can obtain the information to figure out how to be an election worker, I want to go ahead and do it. And so that's just another plug to, I think, the Johnson County Election Office, is that we need to do more to make those opportunities available to underrepresented groups in our area.
Agreed. And you brought up city elected officials, and those are generally the most accessible because you can run into them at the grocery store,
Right.
you know, or at the post office if you're picking up one stamp,
right.
Or, you know, at the gas station. You go to the city website, go to your city website and look up your elected officials. Their contact information is on there, and call them, email them. When you see them, as a former elected, it wasn't always my favorite if someone came up and yelled at me at the grocery store, but go up and talk to your elected officials if you recognize them and ask them questions, because you won't know the answer unless you do. So it's a very good point, Lynnea. I am sad to say I don't have an answer to this question, but for anyone else out there, is there any place to research judges that you found? Because that seems to be the number one question that I get personally, is where do I find info on judges?
So in other states, there's different bar associations by demographics, such as like the Latinx Bar Association or a Black Bar Association that has more relevant, less lawyery information available. In Kansas, I haven't found any of those things here, but our Kansas Bar Association does put out recommendations on if you should retain a judge or not. For the most part, as far as I've seen, while I've looked at this and done my research, they almost always say to retain the judges. There are some circumstances, and it's my understanding that it has to be kind of extreme for them to say, no, we don't think you should retain a judge. Personally, what I do, because I work at the ACLU, so I have access to a bunch of lawyers, is I say, what do you think about these judges? And unfortunately, that's completely inaccessible to most people. Before I had this position, even organizing in other spaces, having access to movement lawyers is few and far between for most communities. And so if somebody watching wants to take that on, then I encourage you to.
We all do. Please, and you mentioned the Kansas Bar Association, but they make the recommendations. I don't believe that there's a questionnaire or anything that judges have to fill out, right? There's none of that information that you talked about with the other bar associations that work in a specific community.
No, it's and my understanding, these bar associations are going to be based on kind of the lawyer's understanding of the laws, and then them looking at the cases that they've taken. But as we see in a number of district attorney races, how you deal with the law is not so, black and white, right? There's definitely space for personal bias in how you prosecute or how you take a case. And whenever we have representation, I mean, the Missouri Black Bar Association does a really good job at this, and I know a number of other states do this as well. You can have that kind of perspective. I just haven't seen that to be the case anywhere in Kansas, and I've been looking.
Great, thank you. So, judge research aside, what do we do? What are the core legislative reform pieces that we can get behind and that we should be focusing on? And I open that up to anyone. Or I can jump right in.
I think before we even get to legislative session, there's a couple of things that we should ask the Secretary of State and our local election officials, whether that be an election commissioner such as Johnson County or a county clerk in most of the other communities, to make changes for the general election. Anything that's going to make voting more accessible and safer is going to make our democracy more free and more fair. So we're hoping that counties for the general expand early voting, in-person early voting to multiple locations, especially not in like a courthouse or a police station, right? Like in a number of different community accessible stations throughout the county, and to expand that to the maximum amount of early voting time that they can, which includes nights and weekends. If you have 20 days of early voting, but it's, from 11 to 2 every day, that's not really accessible to everyone. So making sure that nights and weekends are available as well. The other thing that we're interested in doing that I'd really like to see more of is, again, I love the ballot boxes. I know that's been mentioned, publicizing that information more, having more information about voting access, mailing out those advanced mail ballots, and prepaid postage is so important. So important. There's so much misinformation about that. And the Douglas County Clerk, Jamie Shue, says that it's really not that expensive of a program, and the return rate on it is much higher than he thought that it was even going to be. So county clerks and election commissioners can save some money if they expand their early and advanced voting options, because then they're not going to be so burdened on election day. As far as on election day goes, there's a couple of accessibility issues that we saw that it'd be really great to be addressed. I mean, even in some places in Johnson County, we saw lines that were an hour and a half long. More polling places is going to be helpful to prevent that. And again, more advanced voting is going to be helpful in preventing that. Making sure that all of our polling places are ADA accessible is a big deal. Curbside voting is a thing, but nobody knows about it. So having more signs and that kind of thing. And also, whenever people do come on election day, they drop off their mail ballot at a polling place. What we saw a lot of is that they were getting in the voting lines, making the lines so much longer. And so having kind of a separate place, if people just need to drop off a ballot, that they can do that. Because I know that every single election, you see all of these pictures of long lines, and your aunt or something says, "Isn't this beautiful? So many people care about this election so much." But no, that's not beautiful. If it takes you 2 hours to vote, then that means people are going to leave the line. That means that if you've got kids, if you've got jobs, if you've got, if you physically can't stand there for 2 hours, then you're going to be disenfranchised. And so anything that we can do to lessen the load of in-person voting on election day while still keeping all of our polling places on election day and making sure that they are accessible throughout the community in case people can't vote early, those are the recommendations that I would love to see happen before the general election even.
Great. What is curbside voting exactly?
So curbside voting is required by federal law, and it's awesome. So if you have any kind of a physical accessibility issue, you can drive up to your polling place. And in many other states, and what the federal government recommends is that you have like a button that you can push, and then they bring the polling station to your car. So you don't actually have to stand in line and walk and like wait in this line and vote in person. Poll workers will bring the voting site to you. So for some of members of our older community, or for folks who have accessibility issues, this is a federal right that we have to be able to access our vote, and nobody knows about it. And because of COVID concerns, we didn't this year, but in the 2018 election, we did kind of some random spot checking at polling locations all across the state of Kansas, and almost none of them even have signs showing that it's an option. Before I got this job, I had no idea it was an option either. So how would I expect, the general public to know? It'd be great to have a lot more education coming out of our county clerk and election commissioner's office about those kinds of options, and more clear signage on election day and in early voting whenever you're voting in person.
I would probably punt this to Secretary of State. Most of what we're talking about, I would punt to the Secretary of State's office to get a cohesive plan together for every single county, right? Would that be the dream?
That would be the dream, because again, whenever we don't have equal access, then that's not democracy, right? It's one person, one vote, and every vote counts. But if one community can go and vote like nothing, and it's so easy, but then another community, especially some of our rural communities that do not have the financial resources that places like Johnson County have, you've got to drive an extraordinarily long way to your polling site. Early voting is nearly nothing in some of these places. You've got counties where you've only got maybe a couple of polling locations in the entire county. And I mean, rural voters deserve better, even if their county government is not perhaps has the same kind of financial resources as a Johnson County government would have.
And another thing we learned in the primaries in this cycle is that the postage varies greatly between each of the different jurisdictions or each of the municipalities for mail-in votes or for absentee voting. And the size of the envelope is different as well. And things look different. So there's not one education piece that could be put out from the state that says, this is exactly how you do it. This is the amount of postage you need. We actually want it to be prepaid, so we don't even want that part on there. But there really needs to be some kind of standardization in the voting process so that everyone can vote.
Yeah, that struck an idea with me, especially after working the polls on Tuesday. Another thing I noticed is that when people did successfully apply for an advanced ballot and showed up to the polls as well, that would trigger kind of a note to the people working the polls saying they had an advanced ballot sent their provisional voter. So it's kind of like that almost in a way made me think that that was an additional hurdle as well, because I guess at that point they're kind of questioning whether or not the advanced ballot was sent in. And in my opinion, if you're going to go through the same steps to make them vote provisionally and then at the election office decide whether or not that their vote is going to count, they might as well go ahead and use a machine or do a paper ballot just like everybody else, right? So I guess that was just another thing that was something I thought could be different as well, is that you're pushing everyone to do the advanced ballots and vote in advance, but when they do kind of maybe double duty and show up to the polls, why do they have to be a provisional voter?
That's a good question. And I don't have the answer to it because I'm not an attorney. Melissa, you're not an attorney, but you seem to be closest to them.
So the provisional voting is like kind of what my It's a Beautiful Mind bullet board looks like right now, is like mapping out what's going on with provisional ballots. And you're right, it's all just bananas. And so, I mean, I'm gonna throw out that I don't think that so provisional ballots and how people are informed of their provisional ballots are also decided on a county by county level. The Secretary of State came out with policies and procedures for the first time this last year, or I guess last year, since 2014, which is pretty amazing considering how much electoral law changed between 2014 and last year, but Chris Kobach. And so the standardization that, Michael, you were talking about, it's not just for the voter. Our county clerks, they don't do elections year round. Right now is also the county budget process, and they're very involved in that too. Having a standardization process where understanding what you do with provisional ballots, understanding, the kind of sizes and dimensions, and just having the given resources from the Secretary of State's office to these election officials, that's going to help them out tremendously. So it's not just helping voters, it's helping our local governments be able to do their job to the best of their ability and have the support from the Secretary of State's office. What you hear Secretary Schwab say all the time is like, oh, they got it, they're great. Yeah, of course they are, but that doesn't mean that they don't deserve the support and resources. And whenever you have this kind of patchwork of different ways of doing things all across the state, it seems like he's really just shirking his responsibilities instead of doing his job and supporting the clerks like they need.
Well, maybe the funds used to, litigate DACA, or not DACA, I'm sorry, DPOC could be used toward, I don't know, making it easier to vote in Kansas and make it easier to administer the vote in Kansas. That would be my suggestion. At least putting that money toward that, right? Nigel, we've cut you out of the conversation. I'm sorry, we just keep talking over each other. Chime in.
Yeah, you're good. What was the original question?
I don't even remember.
Yeah,
it all started with mail ballots, and then we went to postage, something about why is it different in every, we were talking about it being different in every county, and there's no standardized type of voting system.
Yeah, I think that makes things very difficult, especially, again, I'll narrow in on the college campus. I've had to coach people who don't live in Kansas at home, like, where do they want to vote? And then go through the different rules, like by county and by state level. And just, it's a lot of work to try to know all of those things. And I'm an organizer, I'm supposed to know all of them. I get paid to know that, but to know that as an individual and to know okay, maybe if I lived in this county and moved to that county, I should actually double check and see, does this rule that I had to follow over in let's say Douglas County still hold in Sedgwick County? So all of that information, it feels like it's designed on purpose to make it harder for people to vote. And if we're going back to that conversation where the table is built for white, wealthy, cisgender men, it is built on purpose that way.
No doubt. I don't think any of us here today are going to say any differently. And probably most people watching us today will not say anything differently. So it's up to us to make that change, or at least give people the tools to make that change, which I think is what each of our organizations are doing and are trying to do, and then getting people involved to do the same. We are almost out of time. Actually, we are out of time, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time here, but I do want to go around and just say, leave us with one thing. You've left us with a bunch, but leave us with that one piece at the end. Lynnea, I'll start with you because you're right next to me on my screen.
You're next to me on my screen.
Cool.
I think the one takeaway I want to, as a call to action to the community and to the Black community and to the underrepresented groups that our organization supports is representation matters. And so what I would really love to see is that we begin to see the demographics that are represented at the city government level and the city official level to change, even employees of the city. Let's make this look more like the community we actually live in. And so it's a call to action to the community. Find out how to run. If you have something you want to say, if there's an issue you feel passionately about, look up how to run and how to be an elected official. It might be more within your reach than you think. And then people like me, as a 17-year-old or 18-year-old, when I go to vote for the first time and see someone on the ballot that looks like me, I then want to go see what their issues are and then become a lifelong voter. So let's all of us work together to make sure that representation matters amongst the community.
Excellent. Nigel?
I think my piece is take somebody with you, whether it like you're going to the physical polls, take a friend with you to go voting, or as you're going through all these hoops and trying to figure out the changes and stuff, tell somebody else like what, or ask them. You could start off actually with asking them like, do you know how to request a mail-in ballot? And once you've learned that, you can share that with somebody. And that's community building too, is making sure that your neighbors and your friends and the ones you care about are getting their voices heard, because our voices are powerful. That's why they're trying to suppress the vote, is because they know that if everybody can vote, things will change.
Melissa? Sorry, I think I was muted when I was talking.
Oh, sure. If you know anybody or you ever experience any issues voting, or you have any questions about your right to vote and your ability to vote and how you vote, there's been a ton of resources shared. If you don't know where to find all those resources, or you didn't jot down every website with your pen, you can call 866-OUR-VOTE. And if it's a know your voting rights question, we got lawyers for that. If it's a resources questions, we got organizers for that. And if there's any given issue about making sure that you are able to vote and that your vote counts, we're here to help you. So 866-OUR-VOTE. We also have that in a number of different languages. So just like you can call and speak Arabic and you'll be able to be transferred to somebody, or Spanish or Chinese or anything. It's a national hotline. So please put that out as much as you can. If you have any questions about your provisional ballots, all of it, we're here to help.
Excellent. Thank you. And thank you once again, Lynnea, Nigel, and Melissa. Really appreciate you being here today to talk with us. And I'm sure I'll be seeing all of you soon, at least on screen, as we work together to make Kansas a better, safer place to vote. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And everyone out there, thank you so much for tuning in today. Please visit mainstreamcoalition.org to join us, and then to learn more about how you can make an impact in this year's elections. In addition to membership in Mainstream, consider participating in the Voter Network, our foundation's Voter to Voter project. We talked a lot today about making it easier to vote, getting your friends, bring a friend, get them to come with you to vote. Well, this harnesses the power of your current relationships. And you inform and you engage voters, low propensity or non-voters or infrequent voters, and give them the tools to make informed decisions at the polls. So please check us out, mainstreamcoalition.org and thevoternetwork.org for more info. Thank you again for joining. We'll see you next time on Mainstream Coalition's Continuing the Conversation.